You're shaking hands with the owner of a huge oil company, one of America's wealthiest men and a billionaire, when he says to you, "Congratulations, you're going to be a very wealthy man." 5 years later, you're getting your picture taken. When the photographer, he grunts, "Don't smile." This is your mugshot. You may be facing years in federal prison. The lessons from this story will help leaders protect their business, both personally and professionally. Think about your homes, your health, your families, your financial welfare, even your pets, those around you in your circle of influence. We're going to cover critical leadership strategies to better help you protect your business for when the pressure is really on. Our story starts out sounding like another huge entrepreneurial success. You found a business right at the start of this country's oil and gas shale boom, and it grows like crazy. In under 3 years, it's worth over $2 billion. You've got your billionaire partner. You've got another $500 million from other investors. You've got an incredible team with the president, CFO, multiple vice presidents, geologists, engineers. You've got 100 employees in the office, another 200 landmen out in the field. You're going out in the field, looking at the big, tall rigs as they drill down 10,000 feet. You're hitting big boomer wells. It's exciting. You're getting reports in the office of another hit. And you've hired the third-party experts, the lawyers, the auditors, the appraisers, the engineers, the due diligence people. Now, a moment about the Justice Department. Would you believe in this country right now there are 2,300,000 people in prison? 1 out of 35 adults in this country is either in prison, on parole, or on probation right now. And 1 out of 5 adults in this prison in this country is a felon. Many of these people are white collar, and according to the Innocence Project, 2.3 to 5% of all these people are innocent. Now, it's still very unlikely, thank goodness, that anyone here is going to prison, but the lessons apply to outside forces of all kinds. Because think of all the other state, federal, local government agencies that can cause you problems, and then all the other outside forces, unlimited numbers like licensing bodies, associations, unions, competitors, you name it. You don't want them in your business. It could be like flypaper. You get your toe stuck, you try to push off, and next thing you know, you've got your arm stuck, and then they are in your personal business and in your work business. Let's take this time today to learn from my failure, my heartache, my pain, how to better protect your business for when the pressure is on. How many of you remember back in 2008, 2009, the great financial crisis, the collapse? Raise your hand. That would be everybody, I think. This was the time of too big to fail, with the world being on edge because of the financial crisis. This was in the aftermath of Bernie Madoff and bank failures. You're at the airport changing planes, coming home from a vacation, walking through the usual hustle and bustle. There's a flight announcements. You smell coffee where your wife goes to get something. You decide to call the office. You talk to your chief compliance officer, and she tells you that the government has just raided your company. She tells you straight out of the movies, an army full of officials in dark suits. They filed out of elevators. They had video cameras rolling. They produced papers and badges saying they were taking over the company. They were looking for safe stolen gold, offshore accounts, stolen money, houses in Europe, and things like that. Then she gets choked up, and she tells you that they're really bad-mouthing you, sitting at your desk, rifling through your personal belongings, confiscating things, saying they're going to take everything you have, that they've frozen your bank accounts and your assets. You arrive home, and your wife heads out to the grocery store to get some milk. She calls you a few minutes later and says some large men stopped her in the parking lot. Evidently, they followed her and started yelling at her about not getting away with it and making all sorts of other demands. Then you hear a loud pound, pound, pound on the front door, and there's guys out there, and they're yelling, "Let us in, it's all over now." Who are these guys? Are they thugs? The press? The feds? Well, you talk to your lawyer, and he tells you that the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, which is charged with regulating securities and protecting investors from fraud, has gotten a restraining order, taken over your company, frozen your banking accounts, frozen your assets, taken over your company, and sued you for fraud. Then you learn, turns out that the guys knocking on the door, they did have the right to search your house. They look for the safes full of gold, the gold bars, the stacks of cash, the loose diamonds in your wife's underwear drawer. They leave empty-handed because you don't have any of that. Not at home, not anywhere. Well, here's the scoop. On the second day, the SEC wanted to settle the lawsuit. There was no stolen money, and all the investor money was accounted for. But they wanted a big fine, they wanted other restrictions, and they weren't going to give your company back. In fact, they sell your company at the bottom of the market in the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, a month or so after they take it over. Who does that? But you fight on for 3 years until finally you get to a point where you can settle the lawsuit where your insurance company pays the penalty. And you must sign what anyone who settles with the SEC signs, which is a standard neither admit nor deny agreement, where you say you will neither admit nor deny the allegations, so I'm not doing that. Now, there's been a lot of criticism about that by people like Judge Rakoff and other officials, because they say, well, the SEC can sue someone. The smart thing to do is settle, and then they muzzle that person. Alternatively, if they're done something wrong, why not prove it or get them to admit it? But regardless, that's where we are. Well, unbeknownst to you, something else was going on. Someone who had been very involved with your company from the beginning, let's call him Mr. X. He was in trouble, big trouble, prison-type trouble, for something he had done in another state before you met him, and it didn't show up on a background check because it wasn't public. Well, the way the criminal justice system works is you can plead against someone else and get reduced time off your sentence. The plan being catch more bad guys that way, which I'm sure that works. He went in, he pled guilty against us, and he did get pled guilty and then pointed the finger at us, and he did get 8 years off his 20 years of sentence. Ended up with 12. When time stands still, and I still have to pause when I think about this because it kind of makes me shake, but is when your lawyer tells you you've just been indicted, and he hands you a document from the government, and across the top, in big bold letters, it says, the United States of America versus you. The United States of America versus Henry Harrison. That's me. Ever want to feel alone? Like you're up against Godzilla with a little pea shooter? That's what that feels about. Welcome to your worst nightmare, or really daymare, because you wish you were asleep. So you're walking around out here normally, and absolutely nothing is normal. You're facing trial in front of a jury, and your lawyers and the government are telling you if you go to trial and you lose, you are facing decades in prison, up to 200 years life. It's goodbye to everything. Spouse, family, friends, everything gone. So you do what you can do, which is prepare for trial. They come back and they offer you a 10-year deal, quote unquote deal, but you've got to plead guilty against your business partner, and then he'll get 20 years. And then they go and tell him the same thing. They try to split you up. Well, you say no. They come back and they offer you 5 years after another month or two. You've been preparing for trial, and you don't have to plead against each other. You still say no. More time passes. They come back and they offer you 3 years. And your lawyers, they reason with you, they plead with you, they kind of beg with you. Finally, they yell at you. They say, you've got to take the deal. You're risking your life. You never know what a jury will do. You say no. Time comes by. It's getting closer to trial. They come back and they offer you 21 months, which would mean about a year away in what's called a camp, which is for nonviolent offenders. There's no cells. bars, locked doors, but it's still prison. So you've really got three choices here. The prosecutor can pull the deal at any time. You can push for less time and risk him pulling the deal and end up in trial. Or you can plan on going to trial and risk decades in prison. Or you can plead guilty and go away for about a year. And we don't know what our chances were of winning or losing in trial. We thought we had a good case. So you've got a gun to your head, thinking maybe there's one bullet in it. What are you going to do? Are you going to pull the trigger? Or are you going to put away the gun? Because you can fight on for all sorts of reasons. Pride, ego. The cost was too great. We put away the gun. We went to prison. When my grandfather was at the end of his, we called him Gran. When Gran was at the end of his long 93-year-old life, I was able to visit him every day. And the last thing he said to me really stuck. He said, "Remember, Henry," he was kind of a whispery, raspy voice, "remember, Henry, life is an adventure. Enjoy it and appreciate people. The journey goes fast." And I took Gran's words to heart. But when I got dropped off at federal prison, it was no Ritz. But you may be asking, what is it that he had to plead guilty to? Well, what's interesting is the laws are vague and open to so much interpretation that naming it doesn't really tell you much unless it's one of the few simple ones like theft, where person A steals money out of person B's bank account or A steals out of person B's wallet. In our case, it was mail fraud. This is what was known as a circumstantial case. There was nothing secret with my name on it. The investor money was accounted for. There was no money stolen. It was about the circumstances. We stopped raising money because of the financial crisis. In exchange for pleading guilty, they dropped all the original indictments, charges that Mr. X, remember him, had alleged we had conspired with him about. And they had us plead guilty to raising money through the mail from investors for 3 weeks too long, mail fraud. We had spent 4 years with armies of lawyers looking for things to criticize. And the lessons boil down to 3 critical leadership strategies to better help you protect your business for when the pressure is on. And my hope is by sharing these critical strategies, it will better help you protect your business. Because none of us in this room has malintent. None of us. And we all want to protect our business, including our homes, our health, our financial welfare, our children. Critical leadership strategy number 1, I call look at your house from your neighbor's side of the fence. We all know the expression, keep your house in order. Well, consider your house, in this case your business, from every perspective and adapt. And when you consider both sides of the fence with the government, your neighbor on the other side of the fence is the government. When you consider both sides of the fence with your neighbor on the other side of the fence is the government. And on your side of the fence, following the SEC rules is complicated. You're required to set up a new corporation each time you reach a certain number of investors. You've got thousands and thousands of investors. So your lawyer set you up with one holding company, 29 subsidiary companies, all working together in one office on one computer system with one business plan. You've made 11,000 transactions for leases and minerals, drilled 1,000 wells. There's a lot of money moving around. $500 million from investors, $300 million from Sinclair, a line of credit. You've got growing pains. You're on your 3rd upgrade of your accounting system. On the government side of the fence, you've got a team of people whose job it is to make an arrest on the aftermath of Madoff to be the hero by catching the next Ponzi scheme. And most of my family worked for the government. I grew up in Washington, D.C. for either all or part of their career, including both my parents and my grandparents, from Assistant Secretary of State to Ambassador, Intelligence, Department of Commerce, Army, Navy. My mom was a spy working for NSA. And I'm proud of our country and what they've done for our country. At the same time, on the government side of the fence, most of the people don't have any private sector experience, much less any business experience. And when they pull out the magnifying glass to look for things to label as reckless or fraudulent, their viewpoint may be very different than yours. And the other people can have a tremendous amount of power. The government certainly does. Lesson number 1, perspective from all sides of the fence. Critical leadership strategy number 2, I call bring the right people to the party. Remember Mr. X? Well, he received 12 years in prison even after getting 8 years off for pleading against us. And many of us very easily get ourselves in situations where all it takes is to be guilty by proximity. Think about a time growing up when you were guilty by proximity, and probably try not one time, but hundreds of times. Because when mom and dad come marching in, who's guilty? You and your annoying siblings. You and your friends. It's that way growing up. It's that way in life. It's that way in business. Now, proximity can be a good thing with the right people around you. Think of the president of our company. They indicted him and he went to prison for 6 months. How many people on your team would do that for you? And he did that not just for us, but for what he thought was right. He went home that night with his wife and read the Bible before he came back and told them, no, he wasn't going to take their deal of 6 months their deal of probation in order to plead against us. He was going to risk decades in prison because he thought it was wrong to plead against that. He thought it was a lie. That's who you want to be in close proximity with to help you with your business when the pressure's on. Lesson 2, people. Bring the right people to the party.